Guys, welcome to a classic film review of 1971's McCabe and Mrs. Miller, starring Warren Beatty and Julie Christie. The pair of them setting up a saloon and brothel in a North American mining town, but ultimately falling foul of the arrival of a big business corporation and its idea of a hostile takeover. It's one of the grittiest, muddiest looking movies I think I've ever seen. A film that makes you feel cold just watching it. It features two of the biggest stars of its time, de-glamorized to the extreme, and has become a staple of those greatest westerns lists. But it's taken me maybe about 20 years to like it. A film I find brilliant and frustrating in equal measure. Let's take a look.
You can't call them crib cows, whores. I'm talking about a proper sporting house with class girls and clean linen and a proper hygiene.
Well, I don't think you can find my clientele up here too interested in that sort of thing.
They will be once they get a taste of it.
Now, McCabe and Mrs. Miller is categorised as a Western, and it is, but it's unique in that it takes place on the Washington-Canadian border, which is about 1,000 miles away from Utah and Colorado, which is the backdrop of probably about 99% of all the westerns that you've ever seen. It's here in a small zinc mining town that Beatty's McCabe drifts into, and he sets up a little gambling business here. Now, it's not long before he realises the town's population is primarily male, and so he promptly buys himself a few prostitutes, like you do, and starts a business. The problem with McCabe is that he's not as business savvy as he thinks he is, and it takes Julie Christie's high-class Cockney prostitute arriving on the scene to help his enterprise grow, which it does. And the film is an excellent look at how some of these small settlements in the middle of nowhere, existing initially only as home to mine workers, become fully fledged towns. However, the whole film is essentially a metaphor for capitalism in America, or anywhere really, as it's not long after McCabe and his partner Mrs. Miller are approached by the Harrison Shaughnessy Mining Company, who make McCabe a substantial offer for his holdings. And, thinking he's cleverer than he is, McCabe attempts to hold out for a better deal, with disastrous consequences, as the company have some drastic methods of securing the town, which we'll come to in a moment.
Well, frankly, I don't understand. I guess I don't have to tell you that some of our people are going to be quite concerned. You know what I mean?
Now, before I mention the elements of McCabe and Mrs. Miller that I'm not a big fan of, let's have a look at exactly why it's held in such high regard amongst Western fans and critics alike. So first off, its authenticity can't be faulted. Director Robert Altman and his production company actually built this town set from the ground up and continue to build it as the film progresses. So it feels real and not just some cookie-cutter Wild West facade. And throughout the movie, it's either raining or snowing or there's a wind howling through. Everyone's covered in mud and filth. And it all looks great, but its soundtrack has always annoyed me. I'm sure Leonard Cohen is a fantastic artist, but pasting his songs onto the soundtrack of this film, sometimes seemingly at random moments, is quite jarring and distracting for me. And I don't think the movie needs them.
You must leave everything that you cannot control.
And now, also, I'm controversially perhaps not a Warren Beatty or Julie Christie fan. I think they're both overrated. I enjoy Beatty in Bonnie and Clyde, I'll be honest. That was a great role for him. And in all honesty, here, buried beneath a beard and a blanket of stupidity, I can tolerate him. Likewise, I always found Julie Christie a bit bland. Stunning, of course, but here I actually don't mind a Cockney tart with a heart, whose dalliances with the opium pipe take her away from the unsavoury existence she leads. Now, this movie also features the director's penchant for muddy, overlapping dialogue, which does give his films a certain air of realism, but in the first act of this movie, it just makes everything quite difficult to hear. But those issues aside, I've come to really enjoy a lot about McCabe and Mrs. Miller. As I mentioned, it provides a brilliantly authentic depiction of how hard life was in these frontier towns. I love the little details the film sprinkles in. One of my favourite being that as the town begins to thrive with saloons and brothels and bathhouses, when we finally get a peek inside the church that gives the town its name, incidentally, it ends up being an unfinished junkyard, the town having little time or need for God when there's so many willing women around. Although it will come into play in a finale when a disaster there brings the whole town together. And I do actually like the relationship between Christie and Beatty. She bamboozles him with her business acumen. I love that he complains that his bar is empty, but soon shuts his mouth when she tells him that all of his patrons are now in their brothel paying a fortune for its services.
Well, I'm surprised you don't know how much money you got and how much you ain't. Got your credit column on a different page from your debit.
Hey, I'll thank you to keep your old nose out of things you don't understand.
What's 14 from 23?
What?
Of course, McCabe starts to fall for her, but she's far too much of a shrewd businesswoman / opium addict to get involved. Christie, incidentally, was Oscar nominated for this, but lost out to Jane Fonda for her turning Clute. There's also a strange entire scene that I can't make my mind up about, where McCabe goes to a lawyer in a nearby town to get some legal advice. The lawyer here is played by William Devane, who's great, no doubt, but it's like a scene from a separate movie altogether, and feels like a reshoot maybe after someone asked why McCabe just didn't get the law involved if he thought he was in danger. Or perhaps it's a dig at lawyers in general, with Devane more interested in the fame the case may bring rather than McCabe's safety, but hey-ho.
When a man goes into the wilderness and with his bare hands gives birth to a small enterprise, nourishes it, and tends it while it grows, well, I'm here to tell you that no dirty sons of bitches are going to take it away from him. Now, ain't that right?
Well,
You're damn right it's right.
So the movie subverts the conventions of the Wild West by having no one shoot anyone until about the final act of the film, and even then there's no heroic shootout or explosive action. It's a tense game of cat and mouse in the snow, and it doesn't end the way you think it will. Now, preceding this is one of my favourite little moments in the film. So eventually bored with his time wasting and stupidity, the company send Man Mountain Butler and a couple of his henchmen to get rid of McCabe. Now, Butler's played by Hugh Millais here in his screen debut, amazingly. You could roll your eyes at yet another English villain, perhaps, but Millais plays the troubleshooting assassin so well he steals the whole movie with less than 10 minutes screen time. There's a fantastic moment when he tells McCabe that he's not there to make any business deals, but to hunt bear. A threat totally lost on McCabe, who wears a bearskin coat throughout the movie.
well, let's just make that an even 6,500 and you got yourself a deal.
I don't make deals. I came up here to hunt bear. I hear it's very good around here.
Get off.
So McCabe and Mrs. Miller was directed by Robert Altman, who was fresh off MASH and Brewster McCloud the previous year, and Warren Beatty was quite keen to work with him. It was based on a novel from the late 50s titled McCabe, and its original title was not easy on the tongue. It was The Presbyterian Church Wager. Now, the whole movie has this fuzzy, almost murky look to it, due to a decision by Altman and his cinematographer to mess about with the film stock before filming. I won't pretend personally that I'm familiar with the technicalities of it all, but it gives the film this hazy look that a lot of 70s and 80s television commercials had. Now, elsewhere in the cast, we have Shelley Duvall in only a second film role, and Keith Carradine as a young cowboy making the most of his time in town, working his way through the ladies. So McCabe and Mrs. Miller doesn't sit comfortably amongst classic westerns that you could probably name off the top of your head. The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, The Searchers, High Noon, etc. It has a 1902 setting that places it a bit further into the modern age than some of those tales that are set around Mexican revolutions and the Alamo, the Civil War. We do get a glimpse of how regular enterprising folk can build something in extreme conditions but be too greedy and selfish to care for it. And also how ultimately big businesses will move in and take it from them regardless of the cost. I'm not sure things have really changed since. Go check it out.